Hi, my name is Ramirez, Frog Bear, Rami, self-professed targeted individual. As usual, you know what I'm saying? You gotta play into those narratives that, that are set up for you in order to trap you into this very localized view of yourself. No, I'm joking, either way. So, like I was saying in my previous video, that I was going to show a second part to this of me correlating different events, correlating different movements, different trends. I'm going to correlate to Antifa, right? The people that wear all the black and then they, oh, yes, we're doing this for social freedoms, yes, yes, whatever. Now, I want to bring up this lady who I found it very interesting, mainly because she was describing what was occurring during her time period when, kind of the hippie revolution started, Woodstock started, and what she was viewing from a very, what she viewed from a first-hand view, and how what occurred on her campus, because it's very interesting to see that very same thing happened in 2018, or at least for me it started in 2018 because I had already gone to a state college, I had gone to a community college, and I saw things correlate to one another. But remember, there's only one side of this argument and one side of this debate that's acceptable, to the point that you will not get the cops called on you. Meanwhile, on the other side, you will get ridiculed, you will get shamed, etc., etc. So, to push forward through this, let me just switch over to my next scene. And
the stimulation of the debate, we would get into debates or shouting matches. There's an area at the University of Michigan, sort of a central area, where all the kids walk through the center of campus called the diagonal. And we would have tables set up there trying to recruit members into YAF, or College of Young Republicans.
Describe yourself, how the conservatives were treated by the activist left and liberals, which
Well, I can also tell you how they were treated by the academics, by the professors.
Tell me about that.
right, I want to highlight that. How they were treated by the academics and the professors. These are points of authority. What do we know about points of authority and the effect that they have on the experience of their students? Right? Because in most cases nowadays, you see that the points of authority coming from the state, the schools, the institutions are far more reliable than people's family members. People will destroy an entire family themselves just because they would much rather believe what they perceive as the point of authority, right? This goes into my whole belief about how schooling really robs parents of that authority figure status, and how kids will then trust the schools far more than their own parents. But there's more to say about this.
Feeling of being a conservative, because it's always spoken about, as you say, the activist left is always implying in the early 60s how hard it was.
Oh, baloney. I mean, I think a lot of that's baloney. Heck, they could close down Columbia University. They firebombed the University of Wisconsin laboratory, and the professors and the administrators sat on their hands. They did nothing. They were cowed by these kids, students. I mean, those weren't activists. Those were destroyers. My recollection, and it's
Right? Let's rewind it back to 2018 to 2020. What occurred during these points? And, we could mention the George Floyd protest. We could mention the retaliation against that one kid the Kenosha kid, right? He was protecting these local businesses. Like, there was one side of the aisle that got heavily punished for what they did, and one side of the aisle just completely ignored. Oh, nothing happened here. We're not going to press charges. We're not going to actively look for who did this. And then I think it's a more telling sign in her time that actually I can't even say that, because nowadays the professors will defend one side of the aisle and will not engage on the other side of the aisle unless you go to one of these prestigious schools or a private institution that hasn't largely been fucked with yet. But that's not largely the case, because a lot of the times you'll have federal regulators, or the federal mechanism that funds parts of these schools, will also find a way to nudge academics or nudge the staff into one side of the aisle. Because if you look at it now, you can lose your job, say the wrong thing, you'll get socially ostracized, you'll get either privately attacked or just messed with for the rest of the entirety of the whole time. And I think it's why it's very important that the optics of left versus right is so important to these people, that they'll pay off YouTubers, they'll lobby, they'll create laws, they'll create policies, right? And in the most egregious cases, they'll take away your bank account, they'll destroy your job, they'll destroy your career, they'll destroy your public image. This goes very deep, right? But at the same time, it wasn't that bad in the 70s. And the reason, or whatever, I think that she's explaining her time from 1963 or 1973? Can't remember. They mentioned it at the beginning of the interview. But let's play some more.
I'm glad you asked me this. I can't remember the teacher's name, and it's lucky for him. I remember very clearly, mocked me, laughed at me, really, in class. I mean, I didn't take any of that personally. What angered and alarmed me, those are my words. It angered and alarmed me to sit in a classroom at a university that has one of the finest liberal arts schools in the country, and to, in essence, listen to this propaganda. And I'm going to say one thing briefly. I remember very clearly Bill Buckley's line about describing the liberals' definition of academic freedom. And what he said I experienced in that classroom at the University of Michigan. He said the liberals' idea of academic freedom is to expose the student to everything from Galbraith to Schlesinger. And he's absolutely right. I asked the professor, why aren't we studying, or why aren't you talking about the works of Friedrich Hayek, who later won the Nobel Prize in Economics, Milton Friedman, Ludwig von Mises, Ortega y Gasset.
By and large, those are people I've never heard of. And I also don't know who she quoted and those people that he mentioned. But it also goes into showing that there was a clear agenda at this time to show you one side of the aisle of thinking, academics, methodology, philosophy, economics. Meanwhile, she lists the other side of it, like, all right, if we're going to learn this side of the aisle, why can't we learn this side of the aisle? Well, by and large, where are we now? How has our academic, how has our academic institutions, how have they largely developed? What side of the aisle do they defend? And it goes to show you that this isn't an isolated event from 2016 and on. For me, it was 2012 when I went to Humboldt State, and there was a very clear hippie liberal agenda on all levels, on all fronts. I just remember a lot of the language that they were using, which was always trying to affirm me as a victim. Like, I remember constantly having professors kind of like berate me in a certain way. And it was very interesting to see the treatment that I was getting, because it was like, oh, you're a poor victim, you need to be victimized. And I would always tell them, like, no, I really don't. Actually, I really sympathize. I had a friend, Nick, who I make these videos for. Primarily, I make these videos for him because I still remember a very deep conversation. It wasn't that deep, it was very short. But we were in history class, and we had a history professor. And I looked at him, and I'm like, yeah, you should learn about COINTELPRO and how the FBI largely infiltrated these organizations to destroy them from the inside out. And he looked at me, I still remember that look that he gave me of confusion, somewhat anger, somewhat like, how dare you kind of say that? Only for me to raise my hand for her to, like, yeah, go to page da-da-da-da-da in the book that we were reading. And it says right there that the FBI largely had an agenda to destroy these organizations because at the time they were assumed to be communist, but in reality the FBI largely infiltrated them. But again, this is a very... The more I know about what occurred with the Brown Berets, the Black Panthers, and that movement that happened, it was an attack on all fronts. Like, you did have actors who infiltrated these groups that were communist in ideology, but the whole movement, or at least what they were trying to achieve, wasn't a communist ideal. In reality, they just wanted rights. They just wanted to stop that shitty, right? Because we had just experienced 3 wars, and you had people coming back, but right after serving for their country, they would still get treated like absolute garbage. But after finding comradeship in their service, they realized that, like, we really shouldn't divide ourselves, but, you know, to come back to the stateside, to come back to the homeland, only to discover that one thing is what we experienced on the battlefront, but there's another whole battlefront in America, which is kind of what I assume to be the hotbed that led to a lot of these notions of tackling and addressing a lot of this segregation that was going on. But I think it was just the shitty, poor treatment that they were getting from not just other people, but the institutions themselves. This is a very deep issue. But in reality, the way I look at it is, you will always have, or at least we've always had, these instruments that feed whispers into our ears and push people towards certain tribalism, towards certain tribalistic natures of, oh, you're not supposed to talk to him. Oh, you're not supposed to be friends with that kid. Oh, he lives on the other side of the train tracks. Oh, he's a hillbilly. Oh, he's a trailer park trash. Whatever notions you can divide yourselves amongst then, right? Because it isn't just from brown to black or black to white or any of these to Asians or whites. In reality, you'll also still have even their internal strife of, you can't talk to that person because they're poor or something. It's a very deep-rooted issue, but it goes to show you that, at least in this case, because I'm talking about Antifa and the rebel activist that thinks he's doing things for the good, you set fire to laboratories at a university, and you didn't get actively sought after. They didn't actively sought to apply any form of punishment towards doing any of this thing. Either way, I find that to be egregious. But at the same time, look at what happened in 2018. Look at what happened with the protection and the cultivation of the SJW movement, of the LGBTQ movement. How they were sheltered by and large by the police, the FBI, the Department of Justice. Not once ever did you see any ramifications against these people. I think the most current example we can use of somebody who actually got punished for lying was Amber Heard and her lies against Johnny Depp. So I look at this whole thing and I'm like, these are clear tactics. These are clear indications that we're just repeating history. In a sense, we're rhyming with it because the spectrum has evolved. Everything moved to the far right with 9/11, and now we're perceiving this notion that things are moving to the left, when in reality it's like, no. This is still a very totalitarian right-wing state, because you have the institution itself, government itself, protecting these liberals and their liberal agendas. And now we're seeing it manifest with Alfred K, and why I'm trying to really emphasize on Alfred K and how he affected the overall marriage, dating, birth rates, populist control. And, you know, you kind of add into the mix with Margaret Sanger, and the person who developed Planned Parenthood. And just these clear notions of ideology that were implemented, fostered, cared for, and allowed to be growed only for the purpose to serve the state, only for the purpose to serve one side of the aisle, to serve one side of the discussion. And I just find it hilarious that no one else has correlated these data points. To be fair, not many people have the time and the liberty to fully dive into these problems and to fully expand on what's going on. But that's why I think I'm here. I'm here by and large to show that the way I see it, especially right now, because there's a certain elderly demographic that was targeted to some degree, I really do believe that these people were done away with so we couldn't speak to them, so we couldn't gather the information or the experience that they lived through, and how that largely affected the shaping of our world as it is now. I really do believe that there is a deliberate effort to destroy those portions of the time periods. And the reason why I'm saying that, right, I should tongue in cheek with the targeted individual joke, only because I'm looking at it from the perspective of what information is allowed and what information isn't. And it also doesn't help that the YouTube channel that I was constantly watching, called Memory Hole, I was constantly watching videos that Memory Hole was posting, but it's nothing special, right? The things that Memory Hole was posting were just videos from C-SPAN. And by and large, they had to delete their entire library. And I still think that they're under the threat of being completely deleted. But it's because of their titling. I'd imagine that the person who's uploading to the Memory Hole has watched all these interviews and can give you the gist. That's why he's always changed the titles. So, tongue-in-cheek with the target individual stuff, but it's because of stuff like this. If I'm not, right, I could go out of my way to read all these books, but at the same time, watching an interview is far easier to digest, and it's far easier for me to use clips from those videos. It's why, so back to why I'm self-professing targeted individual status is because the Unholy Trinity series, me highlighting that interview with that guy talking about the Unholy Trinity book, just that one book alone ties in together the economic downfall. It also ties in together the upbringing and the fostering of Hilario and his Nazi party. And it also kind of shows you that everything is connected in a sense, right? Because me learning that Winston Churchill had his cousin who was married to a Vanderbilt, who was the head of intelligence, right? Like, there are these things that you have to look at and think, is it just a coincidence? Or isn't it a little weird that most of these families are kind of related to one another? And right, having the Thyssen family's lawyer, also the lawyer for the Bush family, and he was also the lawyer who headed the investigation of where all the money went from World War II Germany, doesn't really beg to ask the question of why? How did this one person who was, and then worked at Solomon and Cronville too, who was also the same lawyer firm that handled all of the creation of the LLCs, who then also handled all of the moving of money. It all goes into really asking yourself, are these things connected, correlated, or is it just a random coincidence that all of these players kind of played a part into the creation or the start of World War II? I really ask these questions because nobody else will. My name is Ramirez. I've gone 18 minutes. Again, I'll try to be more consistent with uploads and live streams.